Was Jesus the Jewish Messiah? I've always loved quotes. They seem to say something that I want to say, but they're able to do so much more eloquently. One saying that I like is that arguments are best kept within the family. So I'm not here today to tell you that Jesus is not the Christian Messiah, or that he is not your personal Messiah. That is an argument for within your own family. But I am here to tell you that Jesus is not the Jewish Messiah. Much of this started from a discussion I was having with a friend of mine, an evangelical Christian. And I started off by simply telling him why we did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and why Jews do not believe that Jesus was God. On the first note, I said the world has yet to be redeemed, therefore Messiah has not come. None of the agreed upon, by both Jews and Christians, Messianic prophecies have ever been fulfilled by anyone, including Jesus. Therefore, he cannot be Messiah. A dead Messiah, respectfully, with no disrespect, is no Messiah at all. When the temple is rebuilt, all of the Jews return to Israel, the world is at peace, and everyone knows that God is God, then the one seated on the throne at that time is the Messiah. We'll discuss this more when we discuss Ezekiel 37. Additionally, no belief will be necessary. It will be visible to everyone. One can simply open their door and look out, or read the newspaper to see that the Messiah has come. Likewise, the Messiah will live to a ripe old age and see his actual children live long lives also. Then, as all men do, he will die. So that's why, in a nutshell, we believe that Jesus was not the Messiah. The prophecies have yet to be fulfilled. My friend did come up with some of his own prophecies and why he believes that Jesus fulfilled them, and we'll discuss those a bit later. As far as Jesus being God, Deuteronomy 32:17 forbids us from worshiping any gods our forefathers did not know. I had a discussion not long ago on YouTube about Psalm 110. Ever which Lord one believes is Jesus, it intimates that David knew Jesus. I pointed out that that was great, and we'd have to ask Christians, what took you so long to catch up? In other words, we've had a relationship with him for 2,000 years before you did. He removed his post. So any God that did not meet us at Sinai cannot be God to the Jews. If you say that Jesus gave us the 10 Commandments, then fine. As I said, we've had a relationship with him for 2,000 years longer than you. And if Jesus did not meet us at Sinai, then he is not God. Let's look at now Messianic Prophecy. The purpose of Messianic Prophecy is to help us identify clearly and unambiguously who the Messiah is. It will not be sketchy. It will not elude. It will be clear. And when someone fulfills those prophecies, then Messiah has come. Jews do not think that there will be any question when the Messiah comes. There's no question of belief. Just as today it would be nonsensical to say that I believe that Mr. Trump is president. It's a fact. And whether you claim him as your president or not is academic. Certainly there were many people who did not like King David and may not have claimed him as his king, but he clearly was still the king. Messianic prophecies have to be accepted by both Jews and Christians. Otherwise, either one of us could come up with someone of our own and prove their messiahship without any significant difficulty. The majority of the universally accepted Messianic prophecies are found in Ezekiel 37. These include the return of the lost tribes, return of Jews to Israel, a Davidic king on the throne. All will obey the law. There will be universal peace. Everyone will know God, and the temple will be rebuilt. These are all found in the latter part of Ezekiel 37. So when evaluating Messianic prophecies, we must first ask ourselves several questions. One, is this a Messianic prophecy at all? In other words, does it clearly and unambiguously help us to identify the Messiah? For instance, to be born of a woman or even riding into Jerusalem on a donkey cannot be Messianic prophecies, as they cannot point to one individual clearly and unambiguously. Second, does it point to our candidate clearly and unambiguously, or could it refer to any number of people or even discount our candidate? Many people believe, for instance, that Zechariah 13:6 points to the Messiah, when actually a careful reading shows that it points to a false Messiah. Third, what is the context of the verse? We can't just parachute down into a verse and make it say whatever we want it to say. One of my favorites of trying to do this is simply to say, Judas hung himself. Now go and do likewise. Here, I've put two verses that are clearly in the New Testament together, although not in context, and made a statement. The Psalms, for example, are not prophecy. Psalms are man's reaching out to God, so they do not count as a Messianic prophecy. And lastly, we must ask ourselves, what was the original meaning of the verse? In other words, would the verse have been understood as Messianic the day before Jesus was born? I do know that sometimes Christians call upon double prophecy as an answer to this, and that's fine. That's certainly their prerogative. But the initial prophecy has to be fulfilled first. So, as an example, if Isaiah does predict a virgin birth, then in fact there were two virgin births, because the first prophecy likewise had to be fulfilled during his time. As a corollary, since so many of the alleged Messianic prophecies relate to Jesus' death and resurrection, why would anyone have believed that he was the Messiah during his lifetime? Do we have the hubris to believe we know something the disciples did not? Or did they know something that they never shared? There is not a single Messianic prophecy that Jesus fulfilled that unequivocally identifies Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. Many people speak of the Bible showing types and shadows, and there is a specific verse in the Bible that does say that hidden things are for God. So in other words, God does not play games and hide things in the Bible such that we have to tease them out and make long, drawn-out arguments. No, the Torah is simple and straightforward. I'd like to quote Martin Luther here, which for a Jew, quoting Martin Luther is somewhat of a problem, to say the least. But Luther said, pre-messianically, our destinies are divided. Now to the Christian, the Jew is the incomprehensibly obdurate man who declines to see what has happened, and to the Jew, the Christian is the incomprehensibly daring man who affirms in an unredeemed world that its redemption has been accomplished. This is a gulf which no human power can abridge. And as far as adding all of the prophecies together, I know Rabbi Skovak did a series on the 365 alleged prophecies in the Old Testament that affirm that Jesus is the Messiah, and basically debunked every one of them. I'll quote a famous atheist who said, "The plural of anecdote is not data." Now I'd like to move on to my friend's explanation of why Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. He said 4 things. 1, who he is, i.e. his ancestors. 2, where he was born. 3, how he was killed, or the timing of his death. And 4, what he did. So let's look at each of these individually. First, was Jesus in the line of David? The virgin birth seems to quail this claim from the get-go. One cannot be adopted into a tribe. As a convert, for example, I do not have a tribe. I'm called a Jew after the tribe of Judah, but this is in its vernacular sense, not in its literal sense. Likewise, a Cohen, or priest, who adopts a son, his son will be named Cohen, but his son is not a priest. So if Jesus' actual earthly father was in the line of David, then we can further discuss this. But since the New Testament claims that Jesus was born of a virgin, i.e. had no earthly father, then the discussion is moot. Likewise, even if we do accept that he was adopted somehow into Joseph's family, Joseph comes from the wrong son and therefore cannot be the Messiah or the King of Israel. Number 2, the location of his birth. W.F. Albright, considered a primary archaeologist of his era, did some extensive research on populations at the time of Jesus. His estimate is around 300 for a village the size of Bethlehem, and he stated that there were probably 6 or 7 children each year under a year of age. So, if we take 300 people and multiply that by 70, just using the time from 0 until the time of the destruction of the temple, which I believe is one of the criteria that they use, there would have been 2,100 people who could have been Messiah without the children being born, which likewise adds another 6 or 7 each year. So this really doesn't help us narrow it down any. And then if we go back up to the first one, and we take these same people and children and calculate how many were from the tribe or from the lineage of David, even using current statistics, about 0.1% of them would be from that line. So once again, we have a very large number of people, and this does not help us narrow down to one individual whether he is the Messiah. The timing of his death, I think they use Daniel for this. Daniel in Judaism is a seer, not a prophet. You'll notice that when you look and see where he is placed in the Tanakh. In general, all of the writings, such as Daniel, part of Ezekiel, and Revelation, the so-called apocalyptical writings, are all discussing things that happened in their own time, trying to make sense, much like our conspiracy theorists today, out of what is happening on the ground. There are many references on the internet of how Jews see the book of Daniel. We believe, for instance, that the first Messiah mentioned, and there are two, was King Cyrus. The second, I believe, many people say, is the high priest. There are variations on this. We're not exactly sure. We do know that First Daniel, or the books, the first chapters, I believe through chapter 6 of Daniel, were written by one person, and the latter verses were written by another. The latter verses are where we find the so-called Messianic Prophecies and the timing of the Messiah's birth and death, and these were clearly written contemporaneously, not as prophecy. And lastly, he mentions what all he did. I'm assuming by this he means the miracles that Jesus performed. Indeed, if you Google first century miracle workers, you will find more than one. There were many. Additionally, both Deuteronomy and Matthew point out the fact that false messiahs can do miracles. So miracles cannot define for us who is the Messiah. And of course, all prophets and messiahs think that they are prophets and messiahs, but there are very strict criteria in the Torah concerning this. What else did he do? Well, then I think we go back to the 365 Messianic prophecies that are reportedly found in the New Testament, and I would refer the interested reader to a wonderful series that Rabbi Skovak did on these. But to wrap up, obviously, as we find in Ezekiel, the lost tribes have not been returned. All of the Jews have not been returned to Israel. We do not have a Davidic king, and it should be noted that Jesus was never the king of the Jews, regardless of his epitaph, which was mocking, not descriptive. Everyone does not currently obey the law in the Torah. Universal peace has not come. The lamb does not lie down with the lion. Everyone doesn't know God, otherwise we wouldn't need millions of dollars spent for missions every year. And the temple has not been rebuilt. It's interesting that, of course, the temple was still standing when Jesus was alive. So in conclusion, if you believe that Jesus is the Christian Messiah or your Messiah, then Mazel Tov. But Jesus was not, clearly was not, the Jewish Messiah. Thank you and shalom.